So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors, and today on this video we're going to reinvent combat for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. These combat tips are more than tips. We're using the word reinvent on purpose because we are trying to look at what isn't fun about combat in D&D and other RPGs and then just obliterate it. So this is kind of a crazy one for me, and I found out that Jeff's been doing this for a while. But here's the first way that you can reinvent 5e combat. Look at what isn't fun for your table and then change it, or in my case, take it away. I play an online game, and I knew I had this big combat coming up for this campaign I run called Those That Remain. And I knew that I had 5 players. I knew that I had, 4 players and me, and then I had all these monsters. And everyone's looking forward to it. They've been like, oh, this combat, we're going to use all this new stuff. So I just didn't want it to become a slog. And this is where Jeff puts the definition of slog on the screen, or not, either way. If not, then you can Google it. But combat becomes a job. It becomes boring. People check out. It's not fun. And so what I did was I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it so that you don't have to count movement. I'm just taking that out of the game. You can just be where you want to be within reason. And as long as I think that it makes sense and you can convince me, you're there. So I took that whole thing out because then I don't have to track exactly where everyone is. I don't have to track where all the enemies are. It just made it so much better. It made it so much cooler. The other thing is that if you're running the combat like that and this person's moving, they can spend a whole turn just moving. I didn't think that was fun. So just take movement out of your 5e combat. As long as it's within reason, DM, Game Master, gets the final say. See how it goes. That's just one way to totally reinvent 5e combat, and see if you like it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one thing that's important to note when we're talking about these things is like, see if you like it is going to be, I think, the important feature, because you might try that in your game and you might not like it, and that's totally fine. But the crux of it is look for the points where things can be different and consider what it might be like if they were. So, like, for example, one of the things that Tim's change does is it makes combat a lot faster because you never have dead turns. Like, if you need to hit an enemy, you can get there. So combat's going to be faster. People are going to have more turns where they're doing active things. But you also lose out on some of the tactical elements of, like, you know, can I move to this place and get this angle on these people? Like, well, that's irrelevant now. So you might like the greater tactics and the greater granularity. You might like the faster, free-flowing, narrative version. But you can try it out and, see what happens. And I think one of the most important things about this is just to give permission to people who are unsatisfied with parts of the game that you can just change it. Like, you can just, like with what Tim did, taking movement out of combat. You can just do that, and that's okay. Like, does it change the game? Yes. Does it change the balance of some of the fine-tuning on some of the classes who get maybe a bonus to move speed instead where they might have gotten another ability? Yes, it does. But as long as the players are all enjoying it and having fun and everyone at the table has said, yes, we want to do this, like, you can just do that. And you can apply that same idea to a bunch of other things in combat. So, like, for example, you might say, like, it feels really bad to just, like, miss an attack and waste a turn. Like, my whole turn is moving up, casting this spell at this guy, and I miss. I used a spell slot, I did nothing, and I wasted my turn. Like, that feels bad. So we're going to try a combat where there's no to hit rolls. Everybody hits. If you make an attack, you hit. If you cast a spell that might have a saving throw, they fail. Just everything happens, and you just roll damage, and you take it, and you go. Like, for some people, that might sound horrible. You're getting rid of an important part of the game, and that the chance of whether or not you succeed is important. And for some people, that might be the best change you ever make. Like, I don't have to have that moment where I use my 5th level spell slot and miss. But the enemies also all get that. So that was just combat's going to be fast. It's going to be deadly because everyone will always be doing damage every round that they want to, or doing the effects of their spells that they want to. The environment of combat's going to be very different from that. And maybe you try it and you don't like it, and you know what? Then you just change it back. Like, it's okay to do that. And you can apply that in a whole bunch of different ways across any of the rules, not just in combat. We're talking about combat here, but for anything really. But the important thing to all that is you can just do those things and try it out and see if you like it. And if you do like it, you keep it. And if you don't like it, you change it back. And no one's hurt from that. Wizards of the Coast isn't going to come kicking down your door because you changed their game. Like, you're allowed to change things to suit how you want them to be. And it's easy to take for granted that the rules have to be the way that they are. And it might not even be that you want to change something and don't feel like you have permission. You might just not even think to change something like movement. The book says there's movement, so there's movement. You don't necessarily always have the idea of, like, what would it be like if that wasn't there? You can start asking those questions and start playing around. We're going to get rid of movement. We're going to make all attacks hit. We're going to do that. And we're just going to see how it feels for a little bit. And if we all like it, we'll keep going, knowing that combat's going to be fast, deadly, less strategic, and more bloody. Maybe that's exciting. Maybe that gets rid of a part of the game that people like. We'll find out, So it's okay to look at those things and just say, what'll happen if I change that? Will people be okay with that or not? We'll see. Worst case scenario, one encounter is ruined and you go back to the way that people like, and that's fine. You can have permission to do those sorts of things and just see what happens.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to take what Jeff said and I'm going to just rip it wide open and show you some examples of what that means. Some of this may get a little game designy, but I'll give you some examples to really show you how it doesn't matter and why some of these things would be important. So what I like to do is I like to look at what the goal of the encounter is. And I even say encounter rather than combat, because if you think about it, rules are a way to simulate things, right? So we have combat rules to simulate combat. But somewhere along the line, we decided that combat applied to things that didn't fight. And that's okay. That's rules. That's a whole separate conversation. But we're going to back away from that a little bit. Often in D&D 5th edition, anytime you're hitting something with a sword, you're in combat with it. Even if you're breaking down a door, I think you might make attack rolls in some editions. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me because in the movies you watch, when they're breaking down a door, they're not seeing if the big guy can break down the door. You have big guy plus wooden door. The door is getting broken down. That's the answer. So if you consider that the rules are there not to simulate everything, but to simulate a very specific thing, you realize that it's easy to replace those with something else that simulates the situation you're trying to simulate better. Here are some examples. An example of where combat doesn't really work super great, but something narrative works really well is if in your game, it's like a slasher horror game and Jason is murdering a teenager. This is not a combat. I don't give the teenager hit points because Jason is killing the teenager. That's the scene. That it goes how we all know. We're simulating something different here. Another example is the scene from The Matrix where they're breaking into the main place to save Morpheus. They are killing dudes left and right and jumping and flipping, and there's no reason you can't say, guys, we're going to do totally narrative combat here. You go in, you've got all your guns, you just load it out. Tell me how many flips you do to get the guy. Oh, somebody comes out. You can still have cool, meaningful decision-making. Do you go left or right around the pillar? Do you go up the stairs or use the elevator? But you're not simulating combat. You're simulating storming a building. You have come up with a different set of rules to do it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're not a game designer. You're not trying to design a game where you break through in the Matrix. And that's why we can lean on narrative. But now I'm going to give you an example that marries the two together to show you that anybody can do this using even combat from 5th edition. The example I'm going to use is the sword fight that Inigo Montoya and the Dread Pirate Roberts have on the Cliffs of Insanity. At no point do they hit each other. If you've seen the movie, there's two very competent swords people, and they're, it's funny that I said swords people as an instinct, but I like it. They're sparring for a long time, and they're going, and they're moving up and down, and they're doing flips, and they're having a conversation. This would be a difficult thing to simulate in D&D 5th edition if you used combat. But what I would do instead is I'll be the GM, you know, being the NPC, and there's a player who's, in this case, one of the people. You're sparring, but it's not a combat. Instead, what's going to happen is we're going to narrate what's happening. You're going up backwards up the stairs. Now make an attack roll. Okay, did you hit one? Maybe we do hit points, but maybe there's momentum. It doesn't matter. We're not tracking which one of them kills the other. We're trying to have a scene that simulates a long, complicated, drawn-out sword fight narratively. So we can add a little bit of rules in there, but decide beforehand if you're swinging swords, whether it should be a combat or not. Don't always assume, as Jeff said. Give yourself permission to not make every combat a combat in the rules, because you don't have to.
So, how will you reinvent combat? Tell us in the comments. What's the thing about combat that's just not fun for you or your group? And how do you want to change it? Or do you need help coming up with ideas for changing it? And we're Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and, of course, tabletop games. If you like that stuff, then welcome to the channel, and you should consider subscribing. And if you hit the little notification bell, you'll get an alert anytime we make videos just like this. So, as we usually do, we're going to end this video with the TabTerian Toast. So grab your drink.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Inside or outside of combat.
Sláinte.
James, when you're talking about how like the framework for the rules is sometimes not suited for the scene, Jeff told me this story, and I might butcher some of the details, but I'll get you the high concept, which is he basically had this story of his players against this sniper. And so there was like this archer sniper. And so basically for like lots of rounds, the players were just like, okay, we take the dash action, full like double move or whatever. Okay, then the sniper shoots. All right, we all move full movement. And I know what he was going for because I was trying to design a sniper encounter as well. But that's a perfect example of how like 5e combat isn't for that, you know? So think of something else.